All right, guys, let's look at lesson 2, which is separating a mixture. How do you separate a mixture? We're going to talk about all the different techniques that you can use, and we're going to use some of them in lab this year to actually do this. So separating a mixture. Separating a mixture can be done based on physical properties such as boiling and freezing points, magnetism, solubility, density, and particle size. So how could you separate a mixture? The first would be filtration. This is what you do when you want to separate a solid from a liquid using filter paper. So this would be, for example, if you had sand and salt and water together, this would be perfect. So you put a filter paper in a funnel. The sand would be caught up in the filter paper, and all of the liquid, the water, would be able to filter through. Colanders, when you make pasta or when you make coffee, are good examples of using just filtration. Distillation. This separates mixtures of liquids based on boiling points. So if you wanted to separate two liquids, you could do that using their boiling points. So this is more difficult. So this is what your setup would look like. You would have a Bunsen burner with a salt water bath in here. So what would happen is that you would heat the water, it would boil off, go down this tube, and in this tube would be cold water, and it would condense that steam, that water vapor, and you would be able to collect just pure water down in the bottom. That distilled water that we've used in the past in the density lab, I used distillation to make tap water, the water that we get out of our sinks, pure H2O molecules, using this kind of a setup. Evaporation. This will separate aqueous solutions. So, for example, if we wanted to separate salt and water, what we would do is we would put a saltwater solution in an evaporating dish, then we would heat it. And what would be left in the dish would just be crystallized salt, and the water would evaporate into water vapor. If you let, say, for example, salt water sit out on your counter for a long period of time in the sun, the same thing would happen. It would just take a lot longer time because the sun does not apply as much heat as a Bunsen burner does. Chromatography will separate particles based on size. So the larger your particles, the smaller the less they will travel on your chromatography. A lot of the times they will use this technique when they're trying to identify different kinds of inks in an ink sample for like a forensic lab. So if this was our initial ink sample, as time goes on, the inks will actually separate into the different wavelengths, and you can, it kind of produces the fingerprint per se. So let's look at a check your understanding. This was a really short lesson, so we're not going to have any practice to go along with it, but this is one of the first things that we will talk about tomorrow. So your question is, you have a solution of glucose and water. What method would you use to separate the water and the glucose? Which one of those methods that we've just talked about would you use to separate water and glucose? Answer this, and we'll talk about it tomorrow in class.